Hello and welcome to Cheshire Audio. Now, this is a long-awaited cosy chat about cartridges. I've been trying to film this all week and it's just everything's been against me really. Yesterday I had time to do it, pretty clear day, but then when I charged the camera, GoPros are really fussy, you know. They do really quirky things, and I put it on charge, left it overnight, and it must have crashed shortly after I plugged it in. So when I actually unplugged everything, set it all up, and it only had 30% charge, which isn't enough to do anything really. I think I generally get 30-35 minutes out of a full charge on a battery. So there's no way, particularly on the cosy chat things, because I probably film about half an hour's worth usually. But anyway, I'm talking about GoPros and I shouldn't be. Cartridges, I mean, the interesting thing about cartridges, they're a little bit like loudspeakers where people become quite obsessed with them, and they, I've got customers who only ever change the speakers. They just go from one brand to another and go in circles, never spend any more or any less. They have a price point and they just circle around it and buy all sorts of different things speaker-wise. Never change the amp, never change the deck. Likewise, cartridges, although with cartridges it's slightly different because there's people who have multiple cartridges. They'll have a drawful, and you can usually tell who they are because when they're looking for a record player, they want a detachable head shell. And it's almost as though it doesn't matter the fact that a detachable head shell sonically is a disadvantage. But the problem is they won't buy a Riga because they're all fixed head shell. They won't buy a Lynn Sondek. They won't buy a Nottingham Analog. They won't buy, because they're all fixed head shell. They have to buy things with something with a Gelco arm or a Technics deck or something like that, so that they can change cartridges. They can have a listen to that one, or I'll listen to it with one of those on today, or I fancy listening today with a XYZ. Not knocking it. I mean, this hobby is like that. People sort of zero in on things that really, really excite them. And cartridges is a biggie, actually. There's a lot of people very into cartridges, and that's the thing they want to change in their hi-fi system. They want to upgrade the cartridge. And I can't say anything about that because in the very, very early days, when I was still a teenager, I think, really, I kind of inherited the family stereo system, which was a Sanyo Music Centre, and was very into my music and building up a collection. And I had a couple of friends whose parents had proper, separate, decent hi-fi systems, and it was blatantly obvious that they were way better than what I had. And I remember going into, I did what a lot of people do and thought, it's the stylus, it's not good enough. If I want it to be as good as XYZ system that my friends have got, that's where I need to start. That's the bit that touches the record. And I used to go into, there's a shop in a big department store in Wigan called Lewis's, not John Lewis's, it's a different company, it's Lewis's, which were a little bit like, a bit of a higher end shop, a bit like Selfridges are nowadays, I suppose. And they had an electrical department. And in the electrical department, they had a big glass cabinet full of cartridges for record players. I seem to remember brands like Pickering and Shure and the usual mid to end of 70s sort of brands, and dreaming dreams about, if only I could afford and put that into my Sanyo Music Centre, how wonderful it will be. And luckily I never actually saved the money up because none of them were compatible, because it was a ceramic cartridge in the Sanyo with a flip stylus on it, like a 7833 job. The fittings were different, the output's different. I couldn't have balanced it in the arm anyway. So it was a good, I remember standing there trying to, almost figuring out if I could afford one. But luckily I had a bit of an influx of cash for some reason, I can't remember now. I think I decided I needed to go for it properly, and I sold the Sanyo and had some money from probably Christmases, usual sort of thing when you're a teenager, and bought my first proper hi-fi system. And then it began. So I think that had an Audio-Technica 110E in it, which was pretty much a mainstay model, really. I mean, a lot of budget turntables came with a 110E as standard, and it was the cartridge, really, at the budget end. I mean, around that time, the standout brands I remember then were so we're talking sort of end of 70s, early 80s, would be A&R Cambridge, which became Arkham. They used to have a range of cartridges which was C7, E7, C77, E77, P77. The only difference between there was the actual diamond tip, so it's a conical, elliptical, parabolic. Always preferred the E, bizarrely. I think the middle one I always thought was the best value. Very clear and punchy and whatever. Riga's first cartridge, which they didn't make themselves, was very good, the R100. And I always thought that was based on a Supex, but thinking back now, I don't think it can have been. I think somebody told me it was based on a Supex, and it stuck with me that, but I don't think it was, because it was kind of the same body as the A&R, so I'm not sure. I can't remember. It is based on something that isn't a Supex, and I can't remember what it is now. But they were the sort of the mid-ground. There was also things like the Grado was quite big in those. You don't see Grado much now in the UK. It's sort of disappeared a bit. But Grado then, there was the GT Super, which is a fantastic starter cartridge. Very, very punchy. A bit prone to noise from what I remember, but it was very, very punchy cartridge. Won loads of awards and was the thing to buy, apparently. Also around that time, and it's interesting, I still see them now, Ortofon VMS20. I hated that thing. I mean, I seem to remember, it was one that always did well in reviews, and people used to come in and ask for it because it was always doing well in reviews. And to me, it was aggressive and unpleasant and lightweight and all the things you don't want from a cartridge. But weirdly, people still seem to have them now. Oh, I've got a VMS20 in mine, you know, Mark II. I never got on with it. I really didn't get on with it. And the other one I didn't get on with, and which is very strange actually, the Nagoka MP11. Well, the MP10, the MP11, the MP11 boron, which the boron which we all used to call the MP11 boring, because it had no dynamics, no life, nothing, just a big warm sound and nothing. I actually love the current range, but I don't think apparently there's not a lot of difference. So what they've done, I don't know, because I think that the MP110, 200, 150, that range that they do now, the 500 is astonishing. But back in early days, I think the MP30 was quite good, I seem to remember. But what the difference is between modern day and the early versions, unless I've changed as a person, I don't know, perhaps. Might be something to do with that, but I just remember them being so bland, but not the case nowadays at all. And the styluses are interchangeable. I mean, there can't be that much difference between them. What else was good around that time? I'll tell you what was really good, and it's sort of earlier, really. There's a company called Grace who made a wonderful tone arm that was a favourite on the Lynn Sondek in the early days. It was a G707 tone arm. Might be wrong. But they did a cartridge. Funny enough, I thought it was just a single model, but I believe there was actually other derivatives of it. But there was a cartridge called the Grace F9E, which had an almost luminous green stylus, if I remember rightly, like a carrier for it anyway. And it was easily the best moving magnet at the time that, probably to date, that I've ever heard. I've never heard anything quite so lifelike and that tracked so well and was so involving and everything, all the superlatives. Grace F9E was incredible. Nobody's heard of it now. Grace as a company just seemed to just fizzle away and disappear, but the F9E was wonderful. The tone arm was really good. But yeah, it was, Sondek, it used to be kind of before, very, very early days of the Sondek, a 707 with an F9E in it was an astonishing combination on a Sondek. Very, very occasionally hear of people who've still got Grace arms on Sondeks, but I don't know what happened there. Actually, quite interesting to research it, see what happened to Grace. Actually, I did do a bit of, when I was sort of vaguely thinking about things to talk about, I did do a bit of a search on the F9E and see if there are any out there second hand. They go for a fortune. I've seen F9Es at £800. I personally wouldn't spend big money on a 40-odd euro cartridge, to be honest, because they do kind of age. It's not new old stock. It doesn't mean anything really, because the cartridge rubbers and stuff, the suspension rubbers age, and you're not going to get the performance that it had when it was new. Yeah, all a bit silly really, that. What else was there? I'm trying to think. Moving coil-wise, I always really liked Ortofon, and I still do, to be fair, actually. I think Ortofon have kind of lost the way. They don't get talked about so much nowadays, but around sort of early 80s, they were a big name to be reckoned with, I think. And there was the MC10 2030 series, which were very good, and they were developed they were sort of improved and became, was it Quasar, Quattro, and another one, I can't remember. Quasar, Quattro, and another one. Okay, I can't remember what the other one was called. Quartz. Yeah, that range were exceptionally good. I think I had the top, whichever the top one of the three, the equivalent of an MC30 I had for a while actually, funnily enough, in a Sondek. And I absolutely loved it. I did Sondek for a while, then I switched, I did it in Pink Triangle for a while. Absolutely loved that. I think that might have been my happy place, cartridge-wise. It was just, seemed to just play everything, and it didn't sort of impose any character. Tracked everything, and all the really awkward albums I had seemed to sound wonderful with it. I did have a brief episode. I don't think I ever actually owned it. I think I borrowed an MC3000, which was, at the time, I think was the Ortofon's top range, and I didn't really get on with that very well. I always found that it was a literally ceramic body cartridge, and it kind of sounded a bit cold to me. It was very, very detailed. And I think this was the thing. I think the point of the ceramic was that it was very, very low resonance, and it was transmitted very little energy in all this thing. And that was the reason it was supposed to be very good. But to me, it was almost it sounded very cold, and it didn't seem to have enough warmth in it somehow. The other problem with those was that the ceramic bodies were very fragile. So if you fitted it to a deck, if you slightly over tightened it, they would shatter. And the amount of MC3000s, I think pretty much all the MC3000s I saw later on, of people who'd been using them for a few years, were held together with super glue, because they would, it was probably a few £1,000s worth equivalent at the time. And if you shatter your whatever price cartridge, you get the glue out, I think, really. Probably completely wreck the sound of it, but the amount of badly glued together MC3000s I've seen with like things that are slightly offset because they haven't quite got it to glue at the right time. From Ortofon later on did a cartridge called the Roman, which I loved as well. That was really nice, the Roman. A bit like a grown-up version of MC30, I thought. Also the MC25 FL was lovely as well. I mean, I never owned one of those, but that was actually the Roman, again, funnily enough, I'd kind of owned one for a bit. I took a trade in and traded in a Roman and used one for a while, but it was a bit sort of end of life really, so I didn't keep it for very long. But I love that. I thought that was a great cartridge. The only other brand really at the time that was renowned was Koetsu. Koetsu were a bit of an oddity at the time. There's a lot of people in the industry didn't really like them particularly. Somebody's banging in the background. I don't know what's going on there. I think the reason was, I think they were very. I don't think the quality control was necessarily that good. They were all handmade, and they never sounded the same. And I never really found this, but apparently with the Koetsu Black, it could sound amazing or awful, dependent on, various things, I suppose, who'd made it, or I suppose it was all the same guy, wasn't it? But kind of probably on the day he made it or something, when it was a Friday version. And people didn't like them for that. The fact that you could listen to a demonstrator and it'd sound great, and then you'd buy one for yourself and it'd sound completely different. The way around that I found was that they did do what they call signature versions, and they were all batch selected. And one of my all-time favourite moving coils was the Koetsu Red Signature. I thought that was just astonishing. One of the biggest sounding cartridges probably ever, apart from more recent days, Kiseki, which I'll talk about in a sec. Yeah, Koetsu Red Signature was a phenomenal sounding cartridge, and it needed a really good arm. Tended to be put into Ecos Zeta arms, more than a Zeta, because the Zeta had a very similar characteristic tone-wise to the Koetsu. It was very big, full sort of sound, very powerful, authoritative sound out of the Koetsu Reds. never really got to hear the big stuff that they did later on, like Orishis and things like that. I heard an Orishi in a customer system a few years ago, and it was hard to tell because it was a ridiculously expensive, big-scale audio system in a back bedroom, and it was just overwhelming the room. And you could tell there was good things going on, but it had this little Orishi thing in I think it was a Rockport turntable with Wilson speakers and audio research and massive stuff, but literally in a little back bedroom, you could almost touch the speakers. If you put your feet out, you could, what am I doing that for? You could almost touch the speakers, they were so close. And it was just like, whoa. But yeah. Yeah, at the same time, there was Kiseki, and the Kiseki Blue, I remember being astonishingly good. At the time, a little bit bright, I always thought. I always thought they were a little bit too forward, the original Kisekis. The later one, because I've sold them recently, actually, because they disappeared. They stopped making cartridges, and then when the record player sales started to pick up again, they reappeared. They sort of decided to make them again. And I actually was actively selling Kiseki Blues, Purple Hearts, and I sold an A-Gate to a chap, which is a £5,000 one. And absolutely loved the range. The new versions of them are really good, and probably one of the best cartridges ever made, I think. Unfortunately, they started to get quality control problems and have stopped making cartridges until they can solve it. Because I think there's one component that was being made by a manufacturer for them, and the quality wasn't good enough, and the cartridges kept failing, so they've actually pulled the whole range. Probably need to check into that. I believe they're getting close to a solution, and production might start up again, so that'd be good, because I did really well. I probably talked about it before on here, but the Purple Heart was a wonderful, wonderful cartridge, and I really miss having it here, to be honest. Saying that, the A-Gate is astonishing. Good grief. The Purple Heart is a wooden body cartridge. The A-Gate was a stone body, and possibly one of the most dynamic sounding, refined but dynamic at the same time cartridge. Makes everything sound live. It's just an amazing thing. What else? What was going on? What else was there out there around that time, coil-wise? Trying to think of things I didn't like. Oh, actually, it's just reminded me. On a deviation. Breaking cartridges. I'm going to go down a little alleyway with this for a minute. I always find it quite funny with cartridges that people. It's a man thing. Not to be sexist about this, but it's a man thing. Men will never admit to breaking a stylus, ever. There's always, what do I usually get? Oh, the cleaner was cleaning the hi-fi. I've told her not to do it, and she's broken the stylus. The wife did it. The dog's tail wagged near it, and then the stylus was bent. The children did it. The grandchildren did it. Very rarely, I would say 1 time in 20, somebody will say, I broke my stylus. It's just funny. I mean, I can understand it really. I think quite often it's because it might have been broken, and it might have been broken when it was returned to the rest last time you used it. But you don't realise. I've broken styluses, believe me, without realising I'd done it. And I just think it's quite comical, really. I always sort of laugh behind it. So, yeah, okay. Yeah, okay, the dog did it. Okay. And just, I don't react. But yeah, it's a thing. Never admit. Yeah, I broke I think it was the very first Audio-Technica Art 1 cartridge in the country. I think it was something ridiculous like that. It was a brand new model. They were very proud of it. They sent it to where I worked, and I fitted it and then looked at it, and there was no stylus on it. And I never found the stylus. I had no recollection of going anywhere near it, but I broke it. Like I say, it was, I think, one of the first, and it was a big thing. This Art 1 they produced this cartridge, and weirdly, I think one of my colleagues, I don't know if it was the next one that we had or one of the quite shortly afterwards, one of my colleagues broke another one. So I think they were a bit fated, those things. Can't remember how he broke it. Anyway, and another colleague. was fitting a Koetsu red signature to a customer's turntable. And I think at the time it was a £1,500 cartridge, which would equate now, because I know Orishi's, all their range are called Orishi now, I think, aren't they, the Koetsus? They're all about 8,500. So basically, the equivalent of an £8,000 or £8,500 cartridge, fitting it to somebody's turntable, and slipped when he did it. And the stylus actually went into inside his finger. He actually stabbed himself with it. But because the stylus is kind of barbed at the end, he couldn't get it off his finger, and it was fitted to the deck, and he was sort of, what do I do here? Because if I sort of do this, is it going to take the stylus with it? And he was in pain. I can't remember what the end of the... I've started telling you that story. I don't know what the end of it is. I think he managed to get the retrieve his finger without doing any damage. But because I think it was the cantilevers on those were particularly rigid, and I can't remember what they were made of. But anyway, yeah, a bit of a quandary. You know, I'm in pain. Yes. So I'm glad it wasn't me. That was Paul, I think, seem to remember. Yeah, I'll stop talking about this now, it's getting depressing. Yeah, all the cartridges are a bit sort of... I'm just going to seamlessly edit in this little bit that I've forgotten to record. I'm going to blame battery anxiety, because my battery was getting a bit low and I was starting to race through things a little bit. I forgot to talk about Decca, and I forgot to talk about Lin. Now, I owned a Decca London Maroon. I mean, there's a series of Decca London cartridges. I think it was, I remember the maroon, I remember the gold. There may have been bronze and silver as well, actually, but it was a very peculiar design. It seemed to have disappeared now, actually, but there was a very, almost cult-like following for them. And I think the idea of the Decca Londons were that they mimicked the cutting head that would cut the record. So instead of it being an angled stylus, it was a pin sticking straight down and with like a tether behind it. So I suppose the resonance from the movement of the tip would be transmitted along the tether. I suppose it's kind of guesswork, that, but I'm assuming that would be how it would work. I mean, they had this reputation of being extremely dynamic, and they were really, really sort of lifelike dynamics, this ridiculous scale. I felt when I had one that it was probably a little bit aggressive, really. Bit lightweight as well, but the starting and the stopping of things and musically was absolutely spot on, probably better than anything I've ever heard, really. But the drawbacks were probably too much in the end, and I sort of went away from it. And was always this little bit of a worry that if it's mimicking a cutting head, surely a cutting head is designed to cut a record, and what's it doing there? Is it causing any issues with creating its own groove almost? So I kind of went away from that after a while. The other one I didn't talk about Lin either. Now, I've owned a lot of Lin cartridges over the year when I think about it. They were not necessarily universally popular at the time, but I quite liked the K9 and the K18 moving magnets. The 5 was okay, to be honest, but that was like just a very mediocre sort of cartridge in a lot of ways, but, passable. But I quite like them. The 9 could be a bit bright sometimes, but generally nice and punchy. The 18... was lovely. I thought the K18 was such a good moving magnet, based on Audio Technicas, I think, aren't they? And then the moving coils. Now I had a fair few Lins. I think probably favourite, weirdly, was the earlier stuff. I really liked the AZAC, which was a bit of a very distinctive looking cartridge, curved front. Very sort of almost like literally an aluminium can with a curved front and a red sort of bead on the front, sort of to locate where the stylus was. And I thought it was a very, very realistic and very sort of enjoyable sounding cartridge, a bit aggressive in places and that sort of thing, but it had a sort of a life to it that was really engaging. I also had, which was better again actually, but it was these were quite rare. I had an AZAC T, which was like a batch selected AZAC. So at the factory they would measure everything, and the perfect ones were all AZAC Ts. They only made the T for a while. It sort of became a model and then disappeared again. I think the AZAC Ts sort of apparently became the Azarka, but I was never as into the Azarka as the AZAC and the AZAC T. And I also owned, sort of briefly, a Troika as well, and the Troika was okay. There was things about the Troika I really liked. It was musically very good. I mean, it's this Lynn thing, isn't it? Musically, it was musically. You could see what they were talking about. It was musically very good, but it also could sound a bit flat and a bit sort of, unless if there was something going on with the music that was good, you would hear the best of it. But generally, they could sound a bit. The Troika could sound a little bit too polite sometimes, I thought. So I didn't keep the Troika for very long. But yeah, the AZAC T, love that. I can't remember whether it was the AZAC or the AZAC T. I was playing one day, and there was a sort of a crunching and a buzzing sound from the system. And when I looked, I think the tone arm sort of skated back across the record, and the cantilever had fallen off. Just playing, it was just literally playing the record, and it just fell apart, and bits of it were everywhere. Never known that ever happened to anybody else, but for some reason it just did a little self-destruct and fell apart. I think it was probably getting on a bit, to be honest. I think that was a trade-in one that I was using. Had been was getting on a bit. Anyway, I'm going to jump back to the video now. I've put in the two bits that I'd forgotten to talk about, and go off and finish my tea. Okay. Yeah, things that were really good that I've never owned, and things I wished I'd owned when I could have done. Ben's Micro, that had one hell of a following. The Ben's Micro, it's a Micro Glider, I think it was called, wasn't it? And it was imported by somebody unusual, and I never actually got to the point of actually dealing with them as a company. I was at the point where I thought, yes, I really need to do this. They disappeared all of a sudden, and I think they stopped being imported, or they switched importer and then it stopped, or whatever. But that was wonderful. It wasn't an expensive coil, but it was a really nice cartridge, the ones I heard of. Sort of, basically punching above its price point, well above its price point. And then modern day, we've got the Hannah cartridges, which I think are superb. I'm kind of a dealer for Hannah. I've not actually sort of properly signed for it, but if you want a Hannah cartridge, I can supply one, because I just need to basically sign a piece of paper, and I'm a dealer. But yeah, the Hannahs are great, and they work really well with Riga. I'm trying to think what else. I'm trying to think of things that were well regarded that I didn't like. Goldring have always done quite well, actually. It's interesting with Goldring, because they've done some very diverse products. I mean, the 1000 series have been always a go-to design. I find them a nightmare to fit. They're horrible to fit to a deck, because the body sticks out. It's quite bulbous body, and it almost obscures the holes for the bolts. So you have to. I like to fit the bolt with the nut on the top and in from underneath. And it's almost impossible with a Goldring, because there isn't space to get an Allen key in to tighten it up. But most head shells have slots for the bolts, so that's the way you're supposed to do it, really. And I don't like having bare bolts sticking down towards the record particularly. I don't think it's a great idea. So, great cartridge, nightmare to fit, but they've been available without any change probably since the 80s, I think. Very, very long run range. Still stand up, still really good. One of my best-selling products is the 1042 stylus. Do loads of them, because there's so many out there, and people you can upgrade through the range. So yeah, 1042. They tried to kind of replace it with the 2000 series, and it sort of died a death. They brought it out, nobody really bought it. It was a good range. 2500 was good, and bit by bit they've just finished it. So it's very, very odd, really. Some of their coils have been quite good. I seem to remember they did some high output coils that were nice. Goldring Eroica was good. But never that popular, never really seemed to grab people's attention, their stuff. But apart from 10 series, 1000 series was 10006, 1012, 1022 GX, 1042. They're the ones that have always sold, and they've had all these other models around in the periphery, but never been as popular, which is always found quite strange, really. Even the little Elan cartridge, which is their little budget magnet, that's always been good. What else? Sumiko, I quite like Sumiko, and I used to sell them. And they changed distribution, and when they changed distribution, the price went through the roof on them, I thought. So I pulled out of it and stopped doing it. partly because there was things like they had a model. I can't remember the model names now, but they had a model that was a spherical tip, which is your bare essentials basic stylus design. Phone's ringing, and the price went up to sort of beyond the price of the competition's ellipticals and things like that. I'll just stop it here because I'll answer the phone. Right, I'm back. It was just a customer telling me he can't make it today, which is quite a good thing in a way when I'm recording, because I'm always aware that if somebody's about to arrive, I'm always got it in the back of my mind. It's sort of difficult to keep the flow going. Well, what was I talking about? Yeah, we were talking about Subico. Now, yeah, the prices went crazy with the new importer, but I've noticed now that basically everything else has gone up and Subico's kind of stayed where it was. So it's kind of become more attainable now, I think. It makes a lot of sense at the price it's at. So I've heard the Rainier and I really like the Rainier. And I've always liked the Blackbird. So I might look at it again actually now and just, perhaps reconsider it. Audio Technica, now that's another one. It's a bit like Nagoka actually. I didn't really get on with a lot of the Audio Technica models in the 80s. I didn't really like the AT32 moving coil. Bright and aggressive. I always thought the OC9 was quite nice but overpriced. OC7 similar, perhaps a bit thin sounding. Love the magnets, all of them particularly. I really liked all the moving magnets of that era. ATF5 I always thought sounded bland. That was a high output moving coil, I think. Was it? Can't remember. The ATF3 certainly was. But the modern day ones, they've sort of almost kept on the same range, but modified it. So the AT32 became the AT33 EV, and there's various derivatives of. The OC7 I think is gone, and now we've got the OC9, and different derivatives of. There's different types of OC9. The 33 EV is lovely. I thought that works really well in a Riga, any Riga particularly, probably 3 and upwards really. OC9, lovely again, just nice, open sounding cartridge. Not aggressive at all like they used to be. Doesn't seem that expensive for what it is either, really. I think relatively it's a much cheaper cartridge than it used to be as well, really. In sort of, if you project things forward, it doesn't seem as expensive as it used to be. So quite liking those. Now I had luckily the phone call came up actually because I was desperately trying to remember a brand name, and it was a cartridge I owned. Was it end of 90s? Mid-90s? It was the early days of Cheshire Audio, actually. Was sort of, well, I'd say the early days of Cheshire Audio. Could have been 2000s, actually, thinking about it. Soundsmith, American brand, and a chap I knew was importing it, and he said, if it's really good, you'll really like it. Listen to one. He lent me one. I thought, yeah, I really like these. He said, if you want to do it, you need to buy 2 models in, and you can be an agent. So at the time, I actually needed. It was quite fortuitous actually because I just sold. I had a Trilogy 906 phono stage, which was moving magnet, moving coil, and I was running moving coil. I think I had a Kiseki at the time. No, it wouldn't be Kiseki then, would it? Might have been a Lyra. Actually, I think I had a Lyra in there, and for some reason sold the phono stage, can't remember why, and realised I could only plug in as a temporary measure. I couldn't afford a new phono stage, but I could plug into my amp, but it was only magnet. So I took the coil out and put in this Soundsmith, and it's Soundsmith Otello, which was a wooden body. I think they did an acrylic version of it as well, but it was I think it was about £220, so it was a kind of budget cartridge, sort of on upper end of budget cartridge, and the Soundsmiths were all based around a Bang & Olufsen stylus. Really odd choice of componentry, really, but it just worked. It was a lovely sounding cartridge, really punchy yet really open, and very smooth and refined yet exciting to listen to. It had all the qualities you wanted from a cartridge, really, and I really liked it. And I didn't sort of go all out to replace the phono stage so I could put the coil back in. I was just enjoying it as it was, really. I actually ran with that for about a year or so. But then the guy who manufactured them decided that he was going to go up market and changed all the models, and the prices went skyward. And the guy importing it said, I don't think I can justify the price of these, I can't. So he stopped bringing them into the UK. So it was only a short period that he was bringing them in, really, probably 3 years, I think. I did quite well with it, really. I did quite a few Otellos. Then no more. I mean, as far as I'm aware, it still exists as a brand, but not in the UK. You can't get them here. What else was good at the time? Yeah, within coil-wise, I always liked Lyra, but particularly there was a model called, and I know as I'm saying these words that I won't be able to remember what it's called, but because for some reason I have a mental block with this particular model, and all the time I sold it, I could never remember what it was called, and I should have written it down beforehand. The Lyra, it was about £3,000. The Lyra. I've got it beginning with ST, star. Can't remember. Yeah, I'll put it up on the screen. What it was called. It's weird, isn't it? I can remember the Delos, the Kleos, the Titan, the Parnassus. If you go back far enough, Dorian. This model, no, I can never remember what it's called. It was replaced by the Kleos, I think. Really. Yeah, I think it was actually, but it was an absolutely wonderful sounding cartridge, one of the most... It had an ability to pull out in a recording all the acoustic and atmospheric stuff, so things had massive sound stages. I don't think I've ever come across a cartridge that had that ability to that degree, to pull out a sound stage off a recording and just make it sound real. I think some of the Kisekis kind of did that, and I did have a chap who upgraded from one of these whatever Lyras to a Kiseki Red Purple Heart, and it was better, and it was a lot more dynamic, and it was probably I think the Purple Heart was one of the first cartridges that bettered the Lyra in my mind. I just feel as though I should be able to just say it. It's when you get this thing and it's like on the tip of your tongue, you just think, if I just sort of it'll come out, and it never does. So yeah, I think that's it for now. I can't think of anywhere else to go with this. I'm obviously starting to suffer from brain failure, so it's always a sign to give up and stop. I had a suggestion from a customer to do a more in-depth showing how cartridges work internally, perhaps take one apart, perhaps make a model of how it works. I might look at that actually. That's quite an interesting idea. But also before I finish, there is a bit of news as well. Ortofon have brought out a new version of the 2M at last, after me and many other dealers complaining about this, that the 2M red, blue, bronze, black was too tall for most turntables. They have actually brought out a version called the 2MR, which is exactly the same cartridge but 3mm shorter. Now I've never particularly found an issue fitting a red or a blue to a Riga without a spacer. I know a lot of people prefer to put a spacer in. I don't think it's an issue. I think on the cheapest stylus profiles it doesn't really cause any issues. Bronze and black are a different story, they need bringing up, but the reduction in height of the cartridge means that all of them will work in a Riga now properly. So that's good. And also probably fit into things like lin arms perhaps a bit, although it's shorter, not deeper, so perhaps that will probably still be a pain. I don't think they fit into an ITOC, because it's not only tall, but it's actually quite deep as well. Was it ITOC Ecos Akito? I think you have problems with you have to bend the tags back and things. So that's a bit of news. So there is a shorter version of the Ortofon, which so I'll probably start being a little bit more active recommending them, because I've never been totally convinced they suited a Riga anyway, but I think some people actually quite like the precision of the sound and the upgradability as well. So it's quite a nice range for that. So anyway, yeah, I'll stop it there. Where are we up to? I'm trying to think what I was going to do next. I've got a few ideas for other videos, so they'll be coming shortly. I seem to have got into this sort of once a week cycle now. It seems to work. Recording Thursday, Friday seems to work for me. So if I can get another video in sort of midweek, early on, I will do. Usually I seem to find time to do shorts, sort of Tuesday, Wednesday. Sometimes I can just do a quick news update or whatever. So if I can do that, I will, just to keep it moving, really. But yeah, I hope you like this one. totally unscripted again. Sorry for forgetting a few brands. No doubt as soon as I start editing this, I'll start remembering things that I should have put in. But anyway, if there's enough of them, I'll do a version 2. So let's do it that way. Sun's come out. It's been dreadful weather. Absolutely dreadful weather. The sky is completely black over there, but it's blue over there, and the sun's out. Anyway, that's the UK for you. Yeah, thanks for watching. Don't forget to give a subscribe and a like, and I will see you in a future video. Thank you very much.